it's very dangerous to tell me that I get more time than somebody else to speak, because I have a tendency to get pretty excited about social network analysis and social networks, and I could go on. I'll try to keep it relatively brief. But if I do go over, please somebody start waving their hands in the air, and I'll try to wrap things up. So this particular research project was really exciting for me. It's an opportunity to engage in a governance process for climate change adaptation, and it was carried out in New Brunswick. I have New Brunswick on the brain. We were discussing a project there earlier. It was undertaken in Niagara about a year ago, and happened over the course of a year. And the bulk of my focus for this talk will be on social networks and some of the insights that sort of an analysis offers. But I think it's important to provide a little bit of context around the project to begin. So, Ryan mentioned that we, as a research lab, focus on adaptive co-management as a potential way to deal with some of these more challenging problems, such as climate change, which has been classified as a wicked problem. It's uncertain. The effects are cumulative over time, and we're not sure of all the potential impacts of it. So adaptive co-management has been put forth as a potential governance approach that will work well under these conditions of uncertainty and complexity and change. So this experiment with adaptive co-management was undertaken in Niagara to determine whether we could create conditions to really prime the system. So when we talk about the system, it's the social ecological system. So not just the environment, but also the people that live within and have an impact on it. Whether we could create the conditions for adaptive co-management to occur. So what we did as a group was bring together community members who were active in climate change related activities already in Niagara. And these people were identified through an inventory called a social ecological inventory. And if you're interested in how that works, I can speak to it. Carrie can certainly speak to it. Ryan can speak to it as well. And approximately 38 community members were identified and requested or asked to participate in this experiment. 28 initially participated, and a few more joined along the way. And what they did was engage in a year-long process where the research team facilitated meetings and workshops, and the group came together and talked about climate change in Niagara, mitigation and adaptation strategies, and worked together as a group. Before and after the experiment was conducted, these participants were asked to share information about their social network. So people that they communicated with about climate change and the nature of those communications. And so what I'll focus on now is the social network analysis that we did from this experiment. So what's a social network analysis and why does it matter? It's a tool that recognizes the importance of interactions amongst social entities. So all it is, it's actually a fairly simple concept, but it gets complicated, or it gets more complex as you think about the different ways that you can apply this sort of analysis. Really what it is two social entities that are linked together by a common tie. So social entities can be a range of things. In this case, we focused on individuals or organizations. And linkages can be a range of things. And in this case, there were two different types of linkages we looked at. Communication between individuals, or communication between organizations, as well as meeting co-attendance, which gave us some really interesting information. So we'll start with co-attendance at meetings. So in addition to having a range of ways that you can really negotiate a social network analysis, a range of different social entities that you can look at, and different types of ties that can tie those entities together. There's different ways you can view your network once you have it. So the two ways that I'm going to talk about today very briefly are a whole network perspective, so looking at all of the respondents and their ties to one another. And in particular, we're interested in structures that indicate that there's a strong subgroup that forms within those individuals, which is an indicator of consensus building and coordinated action, and that's what we want to see when we're trying to initiate an adaptive co-management process. Also looking at it from an individual actor perspective. So what are those individual nodes or those individual entities? Where do they sit within the network, and what does that tell us about their role within it? So back to our meeting co-attendance. So what emerged from this analysis was nodes. So each of the black and gray nodes on this graph indicate an individual that participated in the process, and they're tied together by co-attendance at least one meeting. So the thicker the tie between them, the more meetings they co-attended. And it only actually shows ties that are 6 meetings or more. So you can see some of these people almost attended all the meetings together. So they were highly connected during the course of this adaptive co-management process that they engaged in. What it shows us is that we had a highly engaged core of individuals that participated in this project or in this experiment throughout the year. And this is great because it shows that there was a structure consistent with consensus building and collective action or coordinated action. We also have a loose kind of loosely connected periphery of gray nodes. Doesn't mean they're not connected to the network, they're just not connected with as much frequency. So the other type of structure that I mentioned was looking at a whole network and from an organizational perspective. So the previous graph was one of individuals. This looks at organizations. So when every person provided their social network information, we asked them to provide it on behalf of an organization. So who does their organization link together with about climate change? And this was the network that emerged in Niagara. So you can see a few things that are really quite interesting, and here we're going to focus on the role of individual actors within a network. First of all, you'll notice that some nodes are different colors. So those nodes indicate those actors or those actors within organizations that form the steering committee, and the red node is the president. You'll also notice that the nodes are different sizes, and that relates to how central those actors are within the network. So how highly connected are they compared to the rest of the people or the rest of the organizations in the network? And you can see that a lot of the steering committee are also highly central within that network. Finally, there's a really interesting tendency towards these actors that were in the steering committee to actually act as bridges between otherwise disconnected organizations. So I'm just going to leave the mic for a second. And here, we've got some steering committee members that are in the network, a whole range of actors that wouldn't otherwise connect. So these people act not only as a source of information and new ideas coming into the network, but also sharing information that's being developed within that core back out to the broader community. So, back to my original question, can we create the conditions for adaptive co-management to occur? Well, the social network analysis would tell us yes, we can. Of course, there's more to the story than that. This is a piece of the puzzle, but it's really interesting to see how social network analysis allows us to look into this governance process in a different and kind of insightful way. So a couple of future directions for this work that I'm thinking about, things like longitudinal changes. So the ideal conditions for a governance group when it first starts out are different then the ideal conditions for it as it matures. And so how does the governance structure change over time, and how is that reflective of positive outcomes? And the other aspect that we're looking at is linking social networks to the ecological system. So explicitly linking social entities to ecological entities and actually mapping them spatially. So these are projects that we're working on in the future. Thanks for your attention.